Okay, so hope you can see my slides.
Yes, it's visible, sir.
Okay, okay, that's great. Okay. So mostly I'll not focus much on the engineering side. I'll just focus on the biology side. So basically, as I mentioned to you in my last lecture, that how much important the computational biology is for everybody. So whether you wish to take lead in engineering or whether you need to trying to take lead in healthcare, everywhere you need the application of this computation. You need the high, good knowledge in this area so that you can take lead. So this is the picture I'm showing you. You know that one of the hottest cake nowadays in engineering domain is called the deep neural network, right? Let me highlight you. Um, what do we get in the deep neural network? And actually, I sometimes uh, I feel very awkward. So when I ask somebody, so if you'll go to the market or any good engineering college, if you'll ask somebody that do you know deep neural network and say yes, 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 we apply in many kind of application. But truly speaking, I have many doubts on this. I mean, also even in my work also I apply, but still I feel that I don't know anything about this deep neural network for many reasons. Why? Because when I was a student, that time the fuzzy logic, if we knew fuzzy logic or neural network, we used to call ourselves that oh, we know many things in this domain of artificial intelligence, right? And now this fuzzy logic or whatever this artificial neural network, these are already in our history, right? And now we are talking about deep neural network. So why we, how come we came up with this idea? So you'll be surprised to know that do you think that this model were actually given by any computer engineer or electrical engineer? No, these are all given by psychologists, neuroscientists. So basically, these are the mathematical models are being built on the concept given by the computational biologist. They told that this is how the human, the brain, the neurons in the human brain work. And based on that, they created this model. And this model we are using in many engineering applications, right? So earlier, you know that if we talk about the ANN, we have only few hidden layers, one or two or three layers, right? But in deep neural network, the name deep means you never know how deep the layers are. So why the scientists came up with this idea? Now the scientists came up with the idea. They found then when they tried to understand how the neuron behave, they found that neurons are very specialized for different purpose. Let's say when I'm showing you this picture, one face. So when you'll give this face image, so some neurons are specialized for the edge detection. Some neurons are specialized for the contrast detection. Some neurons are specialized for the edges. So likewise, they process and finally we see the human face. And this is when the scientists noticed, then they thought that we have to also create this kind of different layers which will process each and individual information separately, and finally it will give us the final result. That's why they came up with this idea. So here I might raise one question to all of you, that can you tell me, if I'll ask that I want to use deep neural network for this kind of application, can you tell me how many layers of neuron I need for my application? Most probably the answer will come no. Nobody can tell how many layers you need. So this is again one of the mystery. Even I'm telling you the way this computational biology is moving forward, the way we are trying to understand the function of the neurons, then most probably this deep neural network would be just like the ANN after maybe couple of years, right? So that's why actually here I'm highlighting what's the need of computational biology, why you need to understand computational biology. So as I mentioned to you, there are all neurodevelopmental disorder like autism, epilepsy, all this kind of problem. These are some snapshots I'm showing you here from my lab, my students' work. Actually, we are just creating some kind of artificial intelligence based tool to diagnose epilepsy, not only diagnose and to manage this problem. These are the some pictures from my lab. And also here I'm just showing you another picture which talked about some of our work. Actually, you know that when somebody is having epilepsy, so the main problem is the diagnosis. So though we have many different kind of imaging techniques are there, whether it's the EEG or fMRI, but in the mostly the doctor suggests to go for 24 hours EEG recording. But from the MRI, it's very difficult to find out the epileptic zone if there is no lessons, or if when you are taking the images of the brain, if that time the brain is not having this kind of fits attack, you cannot get the source, right? So we came up with one idea that is it possible? Let's say if we'll take the resting state brain images, that means when you are not doing anything, you are you are just inside the scanner. I'll take your brain images. From these images, can I find out the epileptic network? And we got more than 100 subjects data from NIMHANS Bangalore, and we apply this artificial intelligence technique to find out the network. And when we publish this work, because first time the artificial intelligence can tell about the network, that's why it got highlighted in many news outlets like Science, Hindu, many news outlets covered this story that finally artificial intelligence can help decode epileptic brain. So this is also a very interesting part of the computational biology. So coming to different things, actually here I've written rewriting, reformatting. Okay, let me talk another story, not this story. Either otherwise you will move towards another domain of computational biology, because as I told you, this computational biology domain is such a huge domain. If I'll talk randomly, continuously 1 month, still there are many things would be still there which we won't be able to touch, right? So okay, I'll discuss this thing if I'll get time. Let me tell you, all of a sudden, okay, why? What brings me to this domain of computational biology? Let me tell you the story, then I'll talk. So when I was okay, I'm just like an engineer like you all. My fascination was that I should work on the well-being of the human. And the first project in my life, I started on the assistive technology. So I just visited a different hospital to find out the problem, and I found a very interesting problem in the domain of and I that create some kind of assistive technology for these people, right? And then I developed 3 gadgets. And when I went to the hospital to test my gadget, that time, definitely the patients are very happy that somebody has done something for us, right? But when you invented something or you have designed something, you know the pros and cons of the device. So likewise, also I knew that what are the problems in this device. The biggest problem was all those devices, the technology which I created for the disabled people, these are the patient need to learn the device. But in the same time, if the patient is not able to learn, they cannot use it. So one obvious question came to my mind that if my device is learning based, that means it is not going to help all the people for whom I have created this device. So one question came to my mind that is it possible to make my device intelligent so that my device will understand what is the need of that person and accordingly it will behave. Did you get my question? So basically I'm telling that can I make my device intelligent? Let me give one example so that you can understand. Just say, okay, let's say when you are having fever and you are at your home, right? And you are sleeping on the bed and your mother will come with some kind of fruits or medicine according to the time. And maybe, okay, you are feeling hungry. You need not to tell your mother, but your mother will come and give you food, right? So your mother, most of the time, she can understand what is your requirement, right? So likewise, can we create a machine or a device which will understand my need and accordingly it will behave? Then, and that time I was a student like, the student you are teaching in your class, right? And then I just talked to different professors of different IITs, and they suggested me maybe you need to learn artificial intelligence, right? And then also I also came across many articles in the domain of artificial intelligence, but nothing could answer my question or nothing could guide me how I can develop this kind of gadget. But then when I entered into deeper regions of this domain, I found that only it's possible if I'll understand the function of the brain, because brain is one of the most uh, uh, so you know that in this universe the human are the most intelligent entity, and in the human the brain is the organ which controls our intelligence, one kind of, right? So that's why I felt that I need to understand how the brain work, and if I can understand how the brain work, then most probably I can mimic this kind of activity in my machine, and in that way I can create the real kind of AI system which I'm looking for. And then from my expertise in instrumentation, medical instrumentation or assistive technology, I shifted my domain. I shifted my domain towards neuroscience, and this is called the computational neuroscience. I thought that I need to understand how brain work, and if I can understand this one, then most probably I can take a lead in the domain which I'm working right now, right? And that's how I fall in love with brain or the neuroscience. And the first project which I started, um, okay, the first project, first intelligence kind of thing which came to my mind, that let's say, uh, okay, let me give another example from the engineering. You know that in the computer vision, what we do, we try to, implement the algorithm by which the machine can see, right? And this is just, we write some code and do this. And you know that if you do like this, tomorrow somebody else will come different algorithm and they will say, see, my algorithm is better than you. But one very obvious question came to our mind. He, do we know that how a human learn to see? Let's say in front of you, you can see the computer. If I'll ask you, what is this device? You will say this is a computer. If I'll ask you, how did you know that this is a computer? Maybe you will say, no, I don't have an answer. Maybe I know by my own, or my teacher taught me this is a computer, right? But if I want to, or if I wish to understand the mechanism of understanding that how your brain knew that this is a computer, most probably I'll not get an answer. And then we just try to find it out if somebody has done this kind of research, that how human brain learns, right? So because why we are thinking about this thing? Because we know that we have the most sophisticated machine in our body. So when we are talking about the vision, or when we are talking about seeing this world, we are the most sophisticated one. So we thought that can we mimic our vision in the machine? And that's why we try to find out the literature, what other scientists have done research in this area. And we found there is no headway in this area. Then we ask ourselves that why there is nobody has not done any research. And then we found that, let's say, if somebody wishes to do research on this area, then how they will do? They have to do the study on a newly born baby. Let's say one baby took the birth, and just after the birth, if you will image their brain, and you will continue your experiment throughout his growth. Let's say the child took the birth, and until the age of 5 years, you are tracking how the brain is changing or how they are learning, right? And then most probably you can answer this question. But this is not a simple job to do the experimentation, right? Because for two reasons. First is you cannot work on a newly born baby because the baby will not understand what you are going to do. So you won't get any reliable data. Second one is that the ethical committee might not give you permission to work or to do research on a baby. That's why the whole world didn't look at this problem. So we thought that, oh, this is an interesting thing. We can do research in this domain. But again, for us also, this kind of challenge will come. Then another question come to our mind, that is it possible, let's say somebody born blind and being blind for many years, that person has not seen anything since birth, and now he's already 20 years old, right? And we thought that is it possible to restore sight to this person? And once this person, because the person is already adult, he's already 20 years old, but he has not seen anything since birth. Just imagine, let's say we did some miracle, and through this miracle, if we can help the person to see, and already he's an adult, so if we'll do research on him, then definitely he will cooperate with us. In the same time also, ethical committee will also allow us to do the research because he's already an adult. And in that way, we'll get some clue to understand how the person is learning to see this visual world, right? So, okay, let me not, okay. Let me to some slides. Okay. Um, so that's why, I mean, so here what I want to see, wanted to say. So just I mean, okay, this is a little bit disconnected, but let me just highlight you here. So when we try to understand the intelligence of the brain, you need to work on three kind of brains to answer all this question. What are these three brains? The first one is to understand the normal brain functioning. That means how your brain is functioning, to understand how the brain develops, and to understand how the brain behaves when the brain is affected with some kind of disorder. And when you will answer this three kind of question and three different kind of brains, most probably you can find some clue out of them, right? So so that's why, I mean, we define a very big goal. So always I am telling you here, before doing research, try to fix a goal, and which should be really very, very big. If the goal is big, if you found the right problem, then nobody can stop you to touch the sky. This is what I'm telling you. Please remember, our research is, if your problem is, I mean, the problem is really good, then your half research is done. Okay. So that time, I mean, we found that, okay, there is no research in this domain. And the same time, this is one idea came to our mind, that if we can restore sight to the blind. Okay. Um, then very interestingly, what we found in India, 1 in every 100 Indians are blind. That means you can imagine how big the problem is in India. And you will be surprised to know that 50% of the blind population of the whole world, that lives in India. And uh, this blindness happens due to many reasons. First thing is corneal scarring. If there is any injury in the cornea, if there is in by birth cataract, you must have heard cataract happens in the old age, but also cataract happens since birth, and that also leads to blindness. Retinal dystrophies, when the retina get detached from the cornea, then also you cannot see. Infections, you know that our mothers, I mean, okay, our many child, they get delivered in the different the primary healthcare center in our villages, which are not even cleaned properly. They are not sanitized, and due to the infection also, the childs also get I mean blind. They become blind. And the last one is the congenital rubella syndrome. You also, maybe you also remember, those who are from the villages, we hardly know that our mothers are vaccinated before the delivery of their child. And due to this also, there is a rubella virus, and due to this also, the child get blinds, right? And but out of all this blindness, nearly 40% of childhood blindness in India is either preventable or treatable. But most of the children, they never get treatment because of many reasons. Um, and when the child born blind, their lifespan is 15 years less than the normal counterpart. And 50% of the blind child, they don't get a chance to see their second birthday. And when somebody is born blind, definitely their education prospect will be also very less. And automatically the employment prospect is also will be less. And due to this problem, India is losing around more than 10 billion US dollar. And this is a very huge loss to the exchequer of Indian economy, right? So the question is, so how we can provide treatment to this kind of blindness? You can see here the child, he's having cataract and he's blind since birth. So, so why this was not curable? So actually, these two scientists you can see here on my screen, David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel, those who got the Nobel Prize in 1981, and they got Nobel Prize for a hypothesis called the critical period hypothesis. And this hypothesis says, okay, let's say I am born all right. I am born all right, and after my birth, you put me in a dark room. And when I'm in dark room, you provided me food, drink, everything, right? And after 2 months, when you'll bring me to the lighted part of this world, and by the time I won't be able to see anything, right? And this is not only for vision, this is for audition, this is for tactile, all this for the sensory development. So they published many papers and they also got Nobel Prize. And this is one of the most dominant hypotheses in the medical science. That means if somebody born blind, and if the blind person will come to the hospital, even if the problem is treatable, but the doctor used to say that you have already passed this critical period timeline, So your brain is, the neurons already learned what to do. So now they cannot learn your visual inputs, right? And based on that, and these two scientists did experiment on the animal, and they concluded the study. And this is one clue we found from their study. We thought that, oh, all these results are from the animal, then what about humans? And then we started a project, a scientific humanitarian project, and which is the best project in the world. This was told by Barack Obama when he was the president. He said that this is one of the best projects in the world ever I've seen. Because you know that science, when we do science or technology, we never know that how it's going to help the society. But this is a project where you can see science, engineering, and society all together. And the project name is called Project Prakash, and this is headquartered at Delhi, but it's founded by one professor from MIT, Professor Pawan Sinha, who is my PhD supervisor. So we did this work together, and in this we are doing this work we started this work around 15 years back. So what we do in Project Prakash, the Prakash meaning bringing light in the lives of the blind, that's why we call Project Prakash. And when we started this project, the whole world was against us. Not only in India, everybody was criticizing us that how you think that you can make it possible, how you think that you can restore sight to the blind. But we just listened to our inner voice, and we thought that yes, it's possible. And since then, we started our research, and first we proved that that hypothesis which was proposed, it was not completely correct. We do outreach, we do treatment, research, and education. Our that lab is in Delhi. We go to different states in India, those who are adjacent to Delhi, like Rajasthan, Himachal, Madhya Pradesh, UP, Haryana, all these adjacent states, and we have a big team. They screen all the children and they bring to Delhi, and we provide them treatment. Here you can see the doctor is doing the surgery, and after that we do research to understand how vision develops after sight onset. And these are nothing but all computational biology we do. What we do? We try to get their brain signal, we try to get their brain images, we try to get some behavioral signal, and from this kind of experiment, we answer many big questions of the science which are still not answered. I'm not going to cover all this. Experiment. We do many interesting experiments and we publish many top-ranking journals. But here I'll just highlight one or two experiments, not more than that. So the first goal is to understand how vision develops after sight onset. But the big question is whether vision develops after sight onset. So you can see here, I'm showing you in this picture, one 8 years old, one 22 years old person. So if you look at this 22 years old, he's from Rajasthan. So if you look at this 22 years, according to that hypothesis, he has already passed that time period. So that means it is not possible to restore sight. But what we found that we did many different kind of experiment. You can see here, this is a functional magnetic resonance imaging where we image the brain. And then what we found, I'm just showing you here, one analysis I'm telling you. This is called the resting state functional connectivity. Here in the brain, you can see, you can divide the brain into different voxel, and from each voxel, we get some kind of time series signal, right? So if I'll club few voxel and I create a one region of interest, ROI kind of thing, you can see here, let's say one ROI is called as PCC and another ROI is called IPS, let's say. So you can see, if I'll take a signal from the red region or the yellow region, they're highly correlated. Whereas if I'll take a signal from the IPS region, it is anti-correlated. You can see in this time series graph. That means all the hotspot, yellow, red color, what you see, they are functionally connected with each other, though they are structurally apart from each other, but they are functionally connected. Okay. And this is one of the very interesting stuff, was again invented by one Indian scientist. So he told that when the brain is not doing any active task, still the brain connected in very interesting fashion. And from that, you can diagnose many kind of problem. So this is called the resting state functional connectivity. And I use this technique for one of my research to understand how brain encode information. So this is a very one kind of interesting hypothesis proposed by some eminent scientist in the world. His name is Horst Barlow, and Horst Barlow is the great grandson of Charles Darwin, and he is currently the emeritus professor in Cambridge University, UK. So he gave one theoretical hypothesis about how brain encode information. So finally, through this research, we could answer that how the brain encode information. Here in this picture of what I'm showing you here, as I told you, when we image the brain, we get hundreds, more than hundreds of images, or not hundred, in thousands. And after processing all these images, this is the part I'm showing you, only the visual cortex of the brain, only the back part of the brain, right? So here in the x-axis, you can see t minus 2, t plus 7, t plus 30. So what does it mean? It means t minus 2 means 2 days before surgery, when the person is not able to see, that when he was blind and when he came to us. This is t minus 2. And let's say t equal to 0, that time we did the surgery. Okay. And then t plus 7, that means 7 days after surgery. I mean 7 days their sight onset. 30 means t plus 30 means 30 days after surgery, and 120 means 120 days after surgery. What we found here in the t minus 2 date, you can see here that there is two big hotspot, yellow red, two big hotspot. After 7 days also the big hotspots are same, but after 30 days you can see the big hotspot are getting disintegrated, and after 120 days you can see there are many small big hotspot. Sorry, small hotspot. What does it mean? It means if I'll talk about the bit encoding system in engineering, let's say if we have 2 bit, and if I'll ask you how many ways this 2 bit can encode information, then your answer would be in 2 different ways. The first thing is, if the bits are dependent on each other. If the bits are dependent on each other, then it would be either 00 or 11. But if I'll make those bits independent in nature, then they might encode the information 00, 01, 10 or 11. So that means when the bits are independent in nature, they are encoding more information. So the similar kind of things is happening here. What is happening? Now, 2 days before, when there is no surgery, the neurons in the visual cortex, they are either on or off. After 7 days also, they are almost similar. But after 30 days, you can see they've started decorrelation. That means they are becoming more independent. And after 120 days, you can see the neurons are more independent, and that's why they're more island. And that's how we can tell that the brain is encoding more information after sight onset. And this is the brain of the 21 years old person. And this is a graph I'm showing you here. This is showing along the x-axis, these are the days after surgery. So along the surgery, the correlation is decreasing. That's why the graph is coming down. That means the white curve is the average of all. That means along the timeline, the correlation is decreasing. That means the voxels are becoming more independent in nature. And through this, we answered this question of the Horst Barlow. I'm showing you this paper. He gave this theoretical hypothesis, but we proved that how brain encode the information. And the second one I'm just showing you here. Another thing is that, I mean, from this brain images, what kind of information we can extract. So you must be knowing there is one problem in the healthcare called the prosopagnosia. Prosopagnosia, that means the person has the face blindness. Even if they know you or they recognize you, but they cannot, when they will see you, they cannot tell that you are this person. This is called the face blindness. And also, you know, the autism also having this kind of face recognition problem. So earlier, the researcher already suggested that there are some specialized area in the brain which respond to faces. There are some specialized area which responds to different scenes like this. And you can see here in this picture, this is the brain, but I have rotated the picture because this is the lower part of the brain. So I have done the geometrical rotation. That's why you can see it's elongated in structure. So this red color known as FFA. FFA means fusiform face area. PPA means parahippocampal place area. That means this area. So these are the study done by some eminent researcher. This Grill Specter, she's professor at Stanford, and they have given all this kind of findings that how the brain is specialized for different kind of function. But if we know the area for the faces, then why we cannot understand this kind of clinical problem? To understand this thing, we just try to do this kind of experiment when this blind people, they start seeing this world. So we did also this face experiment. You can see this is also the brain structure I'm showing you. This is 21 years old. After 2 days of the surgery, after 1 month, you can see how the face area is changing place from one place to another place, right? So that means what we found, that the person can learn, and according to the expertise, they develop this specialized area. And we found this very interesting trend in all the subjects. In some subjects, it's increasing and then decreasing and remain constant. In some subjects, it's increasing in nature. But mostly we found that maybe this visual cortex or the ventral stream is responsible for face recognition, but we could not find the tentative location. Okay. And in this way, what we found from all this kind of research, what we found that yes, that after the surgery, the blind can see what we see behaviorally as well as from scientifically, and through this use of this technique of the computational biology. And from our research, we have restored sight to more than 700 blinds in India, those who are blind, but now they can see just like you and me. And there are some snapshots of these children to whom we have restored sight. And then doing this thing, not only we restore sight, but in the same time, we provide many hypotheses to the domain of medical science. And the same time, all this kind of study help us to develop autonomous engineering system, which is the part of artificial intelligence. And we apply to develop this kind of, intelligent system. So this is, two data I presented to you, but we get many enormous amount of data, whether it's the brain signal. Even maybe you must be thinking that if we don't have this kind of experimental setup like fMRI or EEG, how we can pursue this higher level kind of research. You can do, if you have a computer, still you can do very interesting kind of research. Creating some kind of computational kind of modeling technique, you can answer many interesting research. Okay. So one of the research, and also in the same time, also I would like to highlight you, always we think that if our paper is not very sophisticated mathematics, not mathematical or all this thing, nobody will accept our paper. But always please remember, our life is very simple. Whatever problem we see, always all these complicated problems have simplistic solution. That means whatever the problem is, always you can solve the problem in a very simplistic way. You don't need very simplistic or difficult approach. Even I'm telling you, just doing very simple thing, you can also publish very top ranking paper journal. Let me just give one example. I have many examples like this. Let me give one example how you can do this kind of work. So let's say when I'm talking about this engineering model, you can see here this child is holding a mobile phone, right? So one of the very interesting aspects of artificial intelligence is cross-modal mapping. Cross-modal means what we feel in one domain, how we can feel in other domain. Okay. So this is what I've written here. How do we predict the visual appearance of an object based on how it feels to touch? Is this mimic innate or does it need to be learned? That means when we hold some object, we also can feel that object in our visual domain. So my question is whether we are born with this ability or we learn through our experience. And this is one of the important skill which we need to understand to make our system intelligent. And this is also, this kind of ability also is helping us to make us also intelligent. So when I'm posing this problem, this is not the problem I'm posing you. So actually this kind of problem was posed by Molyneux. Molyneux in 1688. That time Molyneux wrote a letter to this gentleman, John Locke. They are both scientists. And this Molyneux asked a very interesting question. What he asked? Let me. Okay, this written here in green color, but let me put in my own language. Let's say today I'm blind, right? Today I'm blind, and you taught me that this is a cube and this is a sphere. You push this, you put these two objects in front of me, one cube and one sphere, and you ask me, just touch these two objects and understand that this is called cube and this is called sphere. So by touch, I know because I cannot see, I'm blind, right? And just imagine tomorrow morning when I get up from my bed, I could see the whole world, right? And let's say again you will bring these two objects in front of me and you will place this object in front of me and you will ask me, don't touch this object. Without touching, can you please tell me which one is what? So here, though I can see the object, but I cannot touch because I know by touch. So the question is whether the person is able to answer this question or not, whether I can answer this question or not. So this is the question Molyneux wrote to John Locke. And you cannot believe, since the time in 300 years, many big scientists had tried to answer this question. And also they published paper in very top-notch journal, but the answer was not very clear. And finally, we answered this question. And this question was such an important question. It is already mentioned in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So there they mentioned this is one of the most thought-provoking question ever posed by any scientist in the history of philosophy, right? So you can imagine the importance of this question. So what we did, what we did, I'm showing you but here I've not included the stimuli, experimental stimuli. We conducted the study using some kind of very similar kind of model. Let's say I'll create I went to the shop and I got some peg. Peg means Lego blocks with which the child used to play, right? And in that Lego block, I created a similar kind of structure. Similar kind of structure means, let's say if I'll hold apple and orange, they look similar but not same, right? So likewise, I created many kind of like objects like this. And what I did, I try to test this on this newly sighted people. That means newly sighted means, let's say when they have not seen, I did the same experiment, just like, just imagine in my hand, I have two objects, like one apple and one orange. Okay. I gave orange to touch to this person, right? And the person touched the orange. And then I took the orange and I then mixed with apple. So orange is my target, apple is my destructor. And then again, I gave these two objects to him and I'll ask him, tell me which object I had given earlier to touch. If that person will tell orange, then answer is yes. If the person will tell apple, the answer is wrong, right? No, yes, apple, then answer is wrong. So this is called touch to touch. I did another cross model kind, touch to vision. Touch to vision means, let's say unko main dikhaya nahi, I didn't allow them to see. I gave them apple to touch. Okay. Then I took the apple from him and I placed apple and orange in front of him and I'll ask him which one I had given you to touch. So tell me, just looking at these two objects. If the person will tell apple, then answer is yes. If that person will tell orange, the answer is no, right? This is called touch to visual. So this is a cross model. So when I did this experiment on many subjects, here I'm showing you 5 subjects data. You can see here, TT means touch to touch, VV means vision to vision, and TV means touch to vision. So touch to vision is the cross model one. So what we found, we operated, you can see the first subject we operated on 12th January and we tested on 14th January. What we found in unimodal, that means touch to touch or vision to vision, they are 100% accurate. They can tell, right? But what we found in the cross model, touch to visual, they are by chance. That means their accuracy is not good. So what we found, the Molyneux query is likely to be newly sighted, so little transfer from touch to vision immediately after sight onset. But besides this interesting trend, what we found within 7 days, they are doing equally good. They're attaining ceiling level of performance in just 7 days. So this was one of the interesting study in this domain, and we published this paper in Nature Neuroscience. And when we published this paper, it appeared in New York Times, the first page of the New York Times, and they mentioned that finally, after 300 years, the Indian blinds could answer this big question of the science, right? And it has a very interesting connection with artificial intelligence. How? So there, I have many other experiments to validate my uh, claim, but I'm not showing you. I'm just telling you. So how it's connected to the artificial intelligence. You know, who are working in the robotics, what you do, you program the robot and you feel that my robot. But you just imagine with this human data, what we found, these people, those who are the blind, they're already 20 years old. They know everything by touch, though they have not seen. But still, they cannot tell which one is what in the cross-modal mapping domain just after sight onset, right? That means we need not to program our robot at the first outset. We need to give only basic knowledge to our machine, and we need to allow or force our machine to learn by its own. And if we can do that in that way, we can create the real kind of artificial intelligence system. Okay, so I am not talking about this thing. Just, I mean, you need to remember that we need to give only some kind of basic knowledge to the system, and then we need to force the system to learn by its own, and in that way we can make it intelligent. And this is what we call the unsupervised learning. So though it's unsupervised, but still, I mean, you need to guide a little bit in at the initial point, and then it should learn by its own. So there are many other things, intelligent things. Okay, this is what I was talking about. The New York Times covered the whole story of our work. Um, Also, I mean, whatever the research we do in this computational biology domain, it's being highlighted in different paper like the Hindu, the Wall Street Journal, the Science magazine, and also the Geo magazine from Germany. They did a story from my lab in 2017. Also in Nature, Times magazine, Harvard MIT News, and also this Netflix or Discovery. They are making some kind of documentary in our lab. You can see this is my lab at IIT Delhi. So. So all this thing, what I told you, so these are all coming under the domain of computational biology. And if you can define a very big problem, it has definitely has a huge impact on your society, right? And in that way, not only you can contribute to the society, but at the same time, you can contribute in terms of scientific knowledge, and at the same time, you can advance the engineering domain. Thank you very much. And at the end, actually, there is an announcement. Every year, I organize one workshop on brain mapping and artificial intelligence at IIT Delhi. And this year, it is from 11th to 19th, around 10 days. And every day, it would be around 2 talks. And because actually this time it's online kind of thing. And though we try to give hands-on experience here, but this time also, though it's online, but we'll try to organize similar kind of things. If any faculty is interested, you can register for it, because we are only going to take only 50 candidates. So I think now the portal is open. You can submit your application. Thank you very much.